Heading to the marina, coastal South Carolina game wardens Tommy Buchanan and Dale Tanner knew it'd be a busy day on the water.
We had an incoming tide coupled with the inlet. It makes for choppy waters. A lot of people on boats, a lot of people on jet skis, very congested.
Then, after 2 hours patrolling the waterways, Officer Buchanan spotted something about 150 yards away.
I looked up and I told Dale, I said, Dale, is that a body? And he turned at the same time, he said, yes. He was face down.
They pulled up to find a stranded jet ski and a young man in his early 20s. Another jet skier had also stopped and helped them pull the victim into the patrol boat. There were obvious signs of head trauma.
Just looking at him, he was bad off. He was very serious. He had blood coming out of his ears, he had blood coming out of his nose, had a pulse, but his breathing was extremely labored.
Officer Buchanan tended to the young man as Officer Tanner navigated through the heavy holiday boat traffic.
Time is not on our side. For both Dale and I, we were both praying. I remember calling for a helicopter, and I knew that it was going to take that to get him where he needed to be at the trauma center.
The jet skier took off towards the boats clustered near Bird Island, North Carolina, looking for someone who knew the victim. All he had was a last name pulled from the registration number on the victim's jet ski, Hollingsworth.
And all of a sudden, this guy comes up and he says, Hollingsworth, Hollingsworth, yellow ski, yellow ski.
Mark and Vonda Hollingsworth, who'd been bringing their family to Bird Island for years, knew at once it was their 22-year-old son, Kyle.
Was it bad? And he just looked at me and said, shook his head and said, yeah, it's bad. And that's when it hit me. First thing I said was, Lord help me.
Vonda immediately jumped on the back of the man's jet ski.
I said, take me, take me.
As Mark and the rest of the family made their way to the marina, Vonda and the jet ski drivers sped towards the docks where EMS was waiting.
I was thinking, it's gonna be okay because Kyle's such a daredevil and, you know, he just bounces back from everything.
They arrived in time to see Kyle loaded onto the helicopter.
I saw the shorts that he was wearing, and I could tell he wasn't conscious. And so at that moment, I knew it was Kyle, and I knew it was bad. And I heard the helicopter lift off. I could not form the words of a good prayer. All I could say was, oh God, and I knew it was completely out of my hands.
Waiting for Kyle's arrival, trauma surgeon Dr. Antonio Pepe and his team got to work. Initial reports were not promising, and they didn't know how long he'd been in the water.
At the time of assessing Kyle, it was life or death. Does he have a brain injury? And the second one, and I think the most pressing one, was the degree of anoxia that he may have sustained from a drowning in this case. That would, make the recovery much less promising.
A CAT scan confirmed Kyle had an epidural hematoma, or bleeding around the brain. Immediately, doctors took Kyle into surgery to implant a device in his skull to monitor brain pressure. If it got too high, they would have to open up his skull. Kyle was in ICU in a medically induced coma by the time his family arrived.
Dr. Pepe was like, let's just see how this goes. He's really strong. You know, I feel optimistic he's gonna wake up.
If he did wake up, he could have any number of neurological issues. So the Hollingsworths reached out to friends and family to pray.
Everyone was praying. Kyle's high school football coach showed up at the hospital, and he started a Mississippi prayer chain, and Kyle had kids that he graduated with that had gone to different schools. It was just so far-reaching.
5 days after Kyle was admitted, the swelling on his brain subsided. Doctors removed Kyle's monitoring device and weaned him off medication, but he still didn't wake up. After another 4 days of prayer and waiting,
the head nurse came to me and said, Ms. Hollingsworth, your son pulled the restraints up, twisted himself, and was off the bed in a prayer position on his knees like this. And I said, that's my boy. That's my boy. He has so much life in him. And when that happened, I knew at that moment that God was going to pull him through this. I had no doubt.
He regained consciousness. He was starting to respond, starting to move. which is a great prognostic indicator that once you start having neurologic recovery in a very early time frame.
Kyle remembers nothing of the accident and not much of the hospital stay. What he does remember is meeting officers Buchanan and Tanner the day of his discharge, the two men who, through courage and God's providence, helped save his life.
I got up and shook their hand. I wanted to tell them thank you. I had to show them, how appreciative I was of them.
I would say it was an emotional moment, but he reached out under his own strength and shook my hand, and he mouthed thank you. It was very gratifying.
There's so many factors that could have gone wrong in this situation, but Kyle didn't meet any resistance all the way through, just came straight through, and this is what we hope for.
Today, Kyle is back out on the water with his family. While he might take things a little easier, he's still living the life God has given him.
He is my God, my Savior, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't wake up and thank Him, even when I take the first breath of the day.
It was all prayers and the good Lord wanting to tell his story to somebody.
No matter what happened, God deserved that glory because He intervened in so many ways for Kyle.